but to look back at 2011 and also to have a look at what we've got in store for 2012 in federal politics. We're joined now by the Australian political reporter Christian Kerr, who joins us here in Melbourne. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
And we also have on the line from Sydney the political correspondent for the Sun Herald, Stephanie Peatling. Thanks for being with us too, Stephanie.
Good morning.
Now, if we can start, I'm going to ask for a very difficult question, and that is to pick a defining story in Canberra this year that has summed up federal politics, that's been the key. And Christian Kerr, I'll ask you the difficult task of nominating one first.
Look, it's very easy. Peter Slipper, because everything at the moment is about the numbers. We've got the first minority government, the first hung parliament since the early 1940s. No one is used to it. Voters aren't used to it. Politicians aren't used to it. I don't think bureaucrats, lobbyists, or the other people who make up the political machine. Everyone is confused, and it's just creating so many different little aspects, little ructions. But the really big fundamental thing is a sort of crisis of authority coming out of this. A crisis of authority for the Prime Minister, and just politics is a completely alien game for all of us at the moment. It's such a different environment, and the election of the Speaker just shows how unpredictable things can actually be at the moment.
And Stephanie Peatling in Canberra, would you agree with Christian on that front?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Peter Slipper elevation has completely changed the dynamics of the parliament. I would also add for my big pick the carbon tax. That's been Julia Gillard's defining issue, both in terms of her decision to bring that in when she announced that at the start of the year after saying in the election campaign last year that she would not. That's given Tony Abbott a massive licence to run a very, very effective campaign against her. People's support for that issue is tumbling in the polls, which, you know, not so long ago was a huge public issue that people were crying out for action on climate change. And yet, despite this kind of background of public disapproval and a very, very tough campaign against her by Tony Abbott on this front, she's actually managed to get through the parliament, through a minority parliament, what is a fundamental reform to the economy. And this will be, I think, the defining, policy issue of her prime ministership.
And Stephanie, do you think that also, you mentioned Tony Abbott there, it's been an extraordinary year from his perspective, managing to keep the pressure up on Julia Gillard, yet also at the same time, as much as the coalition's polling is high, his own personal polling isn't as high. It's been a rather extraordinary 12 months from his perspective too.
Oh, absolutely. This time last year, at the Christmas drinks round that we had just before Christmas 2011, Tony Abbott was saying, I'll be in the lodge this time next year. The feeling was that he would put so much pressure on Julia Gillard's minority government that it would crumble and it would fall and he would actually take the prime ministership. And yet that hasn't happened. He's still the opposition leader, but he's a very, very tough campaigner, and he's managed to, I think, surprise a lot of people in the government with his toughness and his relentlessness, if I can make up that word, and his ability to just drive through, his opposition to pretty much everything the government is trying to do with seemingly, very little consequences for him.
And Christian Kerr, on that front, how much do you believe Tony Abbott may have to calibrate his political tactics going into 2012 if the government somehow gathers momentum and picks up its primary vote?
Look, I read a fantastic comment on a blog just a couple of days ago, and it was Tony Abbott, triathlon man. And it was, Tony, OK, you've shown you've got the strength, you've got the drive, but politics isn't a triathlon. You've just got to let the voters jog along aside you. And I think that's it. I think he's intimidating them a little bit at the moment. He's just got to pull back that pace. He's got to keep it steady. He's got to keep it effective. He's got to keep driving to that goal. But he's just got to pull it back just that little bit.
Is he capable of doing that, though?
Well, that's the real test. Tony Abbott has shown himself to be, I think, much, much better as opposition leader than anyone expected. But there's this issue of pace, of drive, of hardness. He's just got to keep focused on that goal. He's got to keep going on as he's going on. He's just got to pull it down one gear, and then I think voters will feel a lot more comfortable with him.
Now, there's two words we haven't mentioned yet. Kevin and Rudd.
Who's he?
Is that going to be a feature of 2012? Stephanie, we'll start with you first.
Oh, absolutely. Kevin Rudd's not going anywhere. I don't think anyone believes that he is being a happy little Vegemite, being Foreign Minister, as he consistently says that he is. And we've just seen, you know, in the past few months, even in the past few weeks, just a relentless campaign, not necessarily from Mr Rudd himself, but from his supporters to destabilise Julia Gillard whenever she gets just a little bit of momentum going. And Julia, of course, isn't doing herself any favours in some ways. You know, she managed to neglect Kevin Rudd in her speech to the ALP National Conference, and that just set off yet another round of, you know, kind of stirring the pot and whispers and innuendos and so forth. And he is keeping a very close eye on her. If the Labor's primary vote does not go up quite quickly and steadily in the first few months of next year, then it's game on.
And Christian, what do you think of this little psychodrama?
Well, look, 2 words, Kevin Rudd, and then there's a third word, polling. You look at those news poll aggregates in the Australian today, that polling is really bad. It's not an election-winning position. I say, if, you know, nothing's happened by Easter, we'll be talking leadership far more seriously.
Even without the support of the caucus? I mean, he's a long way from getting enough support in caucus at the moment. You think bad polling is enough to make that
Absolutely. I mean, if you think you're going to lose your seat, it calls for drastic measures.
Certainly, political self-interest will always help dominate and shape issues. Christian Kerr, thanks very much for talking us through the year. And Stephanie Peatling in Canberra, thanks for helping us talk through 2011 as well.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. You're in for another busy year. There you go. Just when you thought things are starting to
No rest for the wicked in Canberra.